cornfield curse that haunted a badge. The cornfields stretched endlessly under the bruised purple sky of an Iowa dusk, their golden husks whispering secrets in the October wind. Officer Daniel Hargrove leaned against his patrol car, the chipped paint of the badge emblem glinting faintly under his flashlight. He'd been on the force for 12 years, long enough to know that rural calls were either mundane or madness, with little in between. Tonight, though, felt different. The air carried a weight, a damp chill that clung to his bones like regret. The call had come in at 6:47 p.m., just as he'd been finishing a lukewarm coffee at the station. A farmer, Ed Grayson, had reported something strange out by his eastern field, lights flickering where no lights should be, voices muttering beyond the stalks. Probably kids, Hargrove had muttered to himself, grabbing his keys. But Ed's voice had trembled on the line, and that wasn't like him. Ed was a stoic old bastard, the kind who'd sooner wrestle a hog than admit fear. Hargrove flicked his flashlight across the corn, the beam slicing through the rows like a knife through fog. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. He sighed, adjusting his utility belt, and called out, "Ed, you out here?" No answer. He stepped forward, boots sinking into the soft earth, and pushed into the field. The corn swallowed him, the stalks closing behind like a curtain. He'd grown up around fields like this. His father had been a farmer before the bottle took him. But tonight they felt alien, alive in a way he couldn't explain. 10 minutes in, he found it, a clearing that shouldn't have been there. The corn parted into a perfect circle, the ground within scorched black, as if someone had lit a bonfire and let it rage. In the center stood a single wooden post, weathered and splintered, with a rusted chain dangling from it. Hargrove's gut tightened. He'd seen plenty. Meth labs, bar fights, even a body or two. But this was something else. Something old. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is Hargrove. I'm out at Grayson's place. Got a weird scene here. Looks like some kind of ritual site. Sending cords now." Static crackled back. Then Officer Lucy Tran's voice cut through. "Ritual site? You've been watching too many horror flicks, Dan." "Ed with you?" "Nope, haven't seen him yet." "I'm gonna look around. Be careful. Backup's 20 out if you need it." Hargrove nodded to himself, pocketing the radio. He approached the post, the chain swaying slightly though the wind had died. Up close, he saw carvings etched into the wood, crude symbols, spirals and slashes, worn by time but deliberate. He reached out, fingers brushing the surface, and a jolt shot up his arm, sharp and cold. He yanked back, cursing under his breath. That's when he heard it, a low murmur, like voices overlapping, too faint to make out. He spun, flashlight darting, but the corn stood silent. "Ed?" he called again, louder. The murmur grew, rising into a chant, words he didn't recognize but felt in his chest like a drumbeat. His hand drifted to his holster. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Hargrove froze, beam locking onto it. A figure hunched and swaying, half hidden by the stalks. "Police! Step out where I can see you!" he barked. The figure didn't move, just swayed, and then a voice rasped out, dry as dead leaves. "You shouldn't be here, Badge!" Hargrove's heart kicked up. "Ed? That's you? Come on out. Let's talk." "It ain't Ed." The figure stepped forward, and Hargrove's breath caught. It wasn't Ed. It was a woman, or had been. Her face was gone, eyes sunk into black pits, hair tangled with dirt and corn silk. She wore a tattered dress, faded to gray, and her bare feet hovered an inch above the ground. He stumbled back, hand on his gun. "Who the hell are you?" She tilted her head, a smile cracking her lips. "The one they left, the one they chained. You wear their mark, Badge. You'll carry it too." "I don't know what you're talking about. Where's Ed Grayson?" "Gone," she said, drifting closer. "Like the others. The field takes what it's owed." Hargrove drew his Glock, training it on her. "Stay back. I don't want to shoot you." "You can't," she whispered, and then she was gone, vanished like smoke. The chanting stopped, leaving only silence and the pounding of his own pulse. He stood there, gun still raised until his radio crackled. Dan, you good? Lucy's voice snapped him out of it. Yeah, he lied, holstering the weapon. I'm fine. Found something weird, though. Get backup out here and call the county historian. We've got history in this field. By the time backup arrived, Lucy and a rookie named Carter, Hargrove had searched the clearing twice. No sign of Ed, no trace of the woman. Just the post, the chain, and that damn scorched circle. Lucy, a wiry woman with a no-nonsense glare, surveyed the scene with her flashlight. You sure you're not drunk? She asked, half-teasing. I wish, Hargrove muttered. You see this post? It's old. Older than Grayson's farm, I'd bet. Carter, all of 23 and eager to prove himself, piped up. Looks like a whipping post. My grandpa used to talk about stuff like this. Punishment sites from way back. Punishment for what? Lucy asked. Carter shrugged. Dunno. Thieves, maybe? Witches? Hargrove's jaw tightened. Witches. The word hung there. Absurd but heavy. He didn't believe in ghosts. Didn't believe in curses. But that woman, he couldn't shake her eyes, those hollow pits staring through him. The historian, Dr. Margaret Klein, arrived an hour later, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She squinted at the post through thick glasses, tracing the carvings with a gloved hand. Fascinating, she murmured. These are pre-colonial, native maybe, or early settler. This wasn't just a punishment site. It's a marker. For what? Hargrove asked. Klein straightened, her expression grim. A boundary. Something was bound here, something they didn't want getting out. The chain suggests a sacrifice. Human, likely. You said you saw a woman? Yeah, looked half dead, floating. Said I'd carry it too. Klein's eyes narrowed. And you're a lawman. So? So the ones who enforced those old laws, sheriffs, constables, they were often the ones who carried out the sentences. If this is what I think, you've stepped into something tied to your badge. Lucy snorted. You're saying Dan's cursed because he's a cop? I'm saying history doesn't forget, Klein replied, and neither does whatever's out here. They found Ed's truck the next morning, abandoned a mile down the road, keys still in the ignition. No blood, no struggle, just gone. Hargrove spent the day canvassing neighbors, chasing leads that went nowhere. By nightfall, he was back at the station, staring at his badge on the desk. The woman's words gnawed at him. You wear their mark. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Those eyes, that smile. The chanting echoed in his ears, louder now, insistent. He dragged himself to work the next day, bleary-eyed and jumpy, and Lucy noticed. You look like hell, she said, sliding him a coffee. Feel like it too, he admitted. Keep hearing things, voices. She frowned. You need a day off, Dan. This case is messing with you. It's not the case. It's that field. Then let's close it. We've got no body, no evidence. Call it a missing person and move on. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But when he tried to write the report, his hand froze over the keyboard. The screen flickered, and for a split second, he saw her face reflected in it. He slammed the laptop shut, heart racing. Oh, that night he went back to the cornfield. The clearing was the same, the post looming like a sentinel. Hargrove stood at the edge, flashlight off, letting the dark settle around him. All right, he said aloud. You want me? Here I am. The air shifted, heavy and cold. She appeared, drifting from the corn, closer this time. You came back, she said, voice soft but edged with hunger. What do you want? He demanded. Ed? Me? What's this curse? She circled him, her feet brushing the ground now, leaving no tracks. Not a curse, a debt. They took my life, bound me here to guard their sins. Every badge that steps on this ground owes the same. Who's they? The law. The ones with iron and fire. They called me witch, thief, sinner, chained me, burned me, left me to rot. Now I take what's mine. Hargrove's mouth went dry. I didn't do that. That was centuries ago. You wear their mark, she hissed. You uphold their will. The field remembers. He stepped back, hand on his gun again. I'm not dying for something I didn't do. You already are, she said and lunged. He fired. 3 shots, clean through her chest. She didn't flinch, just laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Her hands clamped around his wrists, cold as death, and the world tilted. Images flooded his mind. A woman in chains, screaming as flames licked her skin. Men in rough coats, badges glinting, watching her burn. Corn growing over the ashes, year after year, hiding the truth. He stumbled free, gasping, and she was gone again. But the weight stayed, pressing on his chest, whispering in his skull. Days bled into weeks. Ed's case went cold, filed as a runaway. Hargrove didn't argue. He couldn't. The voices followed him everywhere now, a constant hum under his thoughts. He saw her in shadows, in mirrors, in the corner of his eye. His badge felt heavier, tainted, but he couldn't take it off. It was who he was. Lucy tried to help, dragging him to a doctor who prescribed pills he didn't take. Carter suggested a priest, but Hargrove laughed it off. Klein kept digging, sending him scraps of lore about bound spirits and blood debts, but no answers. One night, alone in his apartment, he snapped. He grabbed his badge, drove to the field, and hurled it into the clearing. Take it, he shouted. I'm done. The air stilled. She emerged, holding the badge in her skeletal hands. You can't give it back, she said. It's yours till you pay. Then what? He yelled. What do I owe you? She drifted close, her face inches from his. End it. Break the chain. How? Burn it, she whispered. Burn it all. The fire roared through the cornfield the next night, flames clawing at the sky. Hargrove stood at the edge, gas can empty at his feet, watching the post blacken and collapse. The department would have his head for this. Arson, destruction of property, but he didn't care. The voices screamed in his head, then faded as the clearing turned to ash. She appeared one last time, standing in the blaze, her form softening, almost human. It's done, she said and smiled. Not cruel, but sad. Then she was gone. Hargrove quit the force the next day. He moved to the city, took a job driving trucks, swore off badges forever. The field grew back eventually, greener than before, and the farmers whispered about better yields. But Hargrove never went back. He didn't need to. The weight was gone, the voices silent. Still, some nights when the wind blew just right, he swore he could hear the corn whispering his name.